The Oregon forest is a place that seems alive. In the early morning, mist clings low between towering pines, weaving through the undergrowth like breath rising from the earth itself. The air smells of moss and rain, the silence broken only by the creak of branches or the call of a raven. It is beautiful, but it is also unsettling. Locals say the forest changes quickly, weather can turn in minutes, and logging roads vanish beneath carpets of leaves. To wander too far without knowing your way is to risk never finding it again. It was into this wilderness that two brothers stepped on a late summer morning, backpacks slung over their shoulders, unaware they were walking into a mystery that would haunt their family for decades. Ethan was 19, the older of the two, protective, confident, and deeply drawn to the outdoors. He had always felt at home among the trees. He had learned survival skills from books and from their father, and now he wanted to pass them along to his younger brother. To Ethan, this weekend trip was not just camping, it was a lesson, a chance to show Caleb how to build fires, navigate by landmarks, and read the forest like a map. Caleb was 16, quieter by nature, more curious than bold, where Ethan was steady. Caleb was wide-eyed. He liked stories, listening to legends about the woods. Though they sometimes left him unsettled, he trusted Ethan completely, and when his older brother suggested a trip, he agreed without hesitation. For Caleb, it was a chance to bond, to be seen as more than just the younger tag-along. The plan was simple: hike from the family's cabin along one of the old logging roads, set camp near a ridge, and spend the weekend exploring before returning Sunday evening. Their parents had grown up with these woods. They knew the risks, but they also knew Ethan was capable, careful, and determined to look after his brother. So when the boys set off that morning, their parents waved them off with smiles, unaware it would be the last time they ever saw them together. Neighbors remembered the image clearly: two boys, backpacks filled, laughter echoing down the dirt road. Ethan carried a map tucked into his back pocket, Caleb a water bottle clutched in his hand. They were heading into the forest with the kind of youthful certainty that nothing could go wrong. That evening, a hiker on a nearby trail reported seeing them near the ridge as the sun began to set. He remembered Ethan walking in front, steady and purposeful, Caleb following close behind, glancing back at the shadows lengthening in the trees. Nothing seemed unusual, just two brothers enjoying the wilderness. But they never came home. When Sunday passed without their return, their parents grew uneasy. By Monday morning, unease had turned to panic. They drove to the trailhead, calling their sons names, honking the car horn, waiting for them to emerge from the trees. The forest gave no reply. The search began within hours. Local authorities launched a full-scale effort. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the ridges with spotlights. Dogs sniffed the ground at the trailhead, following faint scents into the woods. But each time, the trail faded into nothing. Volunteers lined up shoulder to shoulder, combing through brush, calling the brothers names until their voices were hoarse. The forest swallowed everything. No tent, no campfire ring, no dropped gear, no torn clothing, not even a footprint. It was as if the boys had dissolved into the mist. Their family cabin became the command post. Maps were spread across the kitchen table, marked with grids as search teams fanned outward. Old loggers joined the effort, men who had worked the forest for decades. They swore they knew every road, every hollow, every gully. Yet even they found nothing. Day after day, hope rose and fell with the sun. Each morning brought new teams. Each evening ended with empty hands. Some searchers swore they heard voices in the trees, faint echoes calling back, but when they pushed toward the sound, there was only silence. Others claimed to see shapes moving between the pines, though no one was ever found. Weeks passed. The helicopters left. Volunteers returned to their lives. The dogs were sent home, restless and confused. The official search was scaled back, then suspended for the parents. It was unthinkable. Two sons gone at once, leaving behind no trace, no clue, not even a direction. They had walked into the forest together, and the forest had given nothing back. Theories swirled. Even in those early days, some said a cougar or bear had attacked them, but predators leave remains. Trails of struggle, none were found. Others suggested they had fallen into a hidden ravine, their bodies concealed by dense growth. Yet aerial sweeps should have revealed disturbed ground. A few whispered darker possibilities. Foul play, someone they might have encountered deep in the woods. But no theory explained the void. Every parent clings to hope. Even against reason, the boys were young, healthy, resourceful. Ethan knew survival skills. Caleb could follow directions. Maybe, just maybe, they had found shelter, waiting to be rescued. Each knock on the cabin door made their mother's heart race. Each phone call held the possibility of news. But the news never came. The forest remained quiet, and so the story of the two brothers began not with answers, but with silence. A silence so complete it felt unnatural, as though the trees themselves had conspired to erase every trace of their passing. Two brothers had walked into the forest together, but neither returned. The days after the search ended were the hardest. The forest had given back nothing, and yet the family could not accept that Ethan and Caleb were simply gone. Their absence felt raw, like a wound that refused to close. For the parents, silence became a constant companion, a silence filled with questions, with hope that refused to die, and with grief that had no place to settle. The family cabin, once filled with laughter and the smell of campfire smoke, became unbearable. Their parents left it abandoned, shutters closed, furniture covered in dust. To return, there was to relive that last morning, watching their boys disappear down the dirt road with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. It was a memory too sharp to face. Instead, the mother lit a candle every night at home. She placed it in the window so that, if by some miracle the boys found their way back, they would see the light and know where to come. Over the years, the candle burned down to stubs, replaced again and again. Neighbors grew used to the faint flicker glowing in the window, a quiet signal of hope that never went out. But the community had its own theories. Some believed the brothers had been victims of a bear attack. Oregon's forests were home to predators, and accidents happened. Yet even those who believed this admitted the lack of evidence was strange. Predators left behind remains, trails, signs of a struggle. Here, there was only emptiness. Others suggested the boys had fallen into a hidden ravine. The terrain was treacherous, with sinkholes and gullies swallowed by undergrowth. Perhaps they had slipped where no one could see. Helicopters and ground teams might have missed the spot if it was deep enough. This theory lingered for years, offering a tragic but natural explanation. But not everyone accepted those answers. Whispers spread through the community, quiet at first, then louder as time passed. Some wondered if the boys had run away. Teenagers, restless, sometimes disappeared by choice. But Caleb had been 16, still in high school, and Ethan had left behind college plans. Their lives were not perfect, but there had been no signs they intended to leave them behind. And why would they vanish without taking money, clothes, or contacting friends? Theories grew stranger the longer silence stretched. Locals began to speak of the Whispering Pines, a stretch of forest said to lure people deeper with voices not their own. Hikers told stories of walking the trail and hearing their names whispered in the wind. Some claimed the voices came from the trees themselves, others from something unseen, something waiting. Parents warned children not to wander near that part of the woods, calling it cursed ground. Myth and memory became entwined. The disappearance of Ethan and Caleb gave old stories new life. The forest had always been a place of mystery, but now it had faces, names, a legend to cling to. The brothers who vanished, people said, and soon, the forest that keeps what it takes, beyond the town. The case spread online. Forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries dissected every detail. Satellite images were pored over, maps compared, theories spun like webs. Some users insisted it was the work of a cult, pointing to strange symbols carved into trees in nearby forests. Others swore it was a government cover-up, that the forest concealed hidden tunnels, or that experiments had gone wrong. A few clung to supernatural explanations, abductions by something not human, portals in the woods where time moved differently. Photos of the brothers circulated endlessly. Ethan's strong jaw, Caleb's shy smile. Their faces became symbols of both tragedy and obsession. Each year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, threads reignited, new theories born, new arguments flaring. To strangers online, they were puzzle pieces. To the family, they were sons. The emotional toll deepened as the years rolled by. Their bedrooms remained untouched. Posters still hung on walls. Clothes folded in drawers. Trophies lined on shelves. Dust settled over everything. But nothing was moved. It was as if time had frozen. As if clearing the rooms would be admitting the boys would never return, for the siblings left behind. Cousins, friends, classmates. The absence weighed heavy. Some spoke of dreams where Ethan and Caleb appeared, standing in the forest, their faces half hidden in shadows, reaching out as though to say something they never could. Others admitted they could not walk near the forest without feeling sick, without imagining footsteps behind them. 12 years passed. Seasons came and went. The forest stood unchanged, its pines whispering in the wind, its shadows stretching across the earth as though marking the passage of time. The candle in the mother's window still burned each night, though her hair had turned gray and her voice had grown quiet. The father aged quickly, shoulders hunched under a weight no one could lift. The community stopped expecting answers. Life moved on for most. But the forest remained a place of unease. Hikers gave wide berth to the area known now as Whispering Pines. The legend endured. A place where voices lured travelers, where compasses spun, where two brothers had vanished without a trace. And then, after years of silence, something changed. One autumn evening, long after the town had settled into routine, a figure emerged from the trees, clothes torn, face gaunt, eyes hollow but alive. It was the first crack in 12 years of silence. For years, the forest kept its silence, until the silence broke with footsteps no one expected. For 12 years, the forest had been silent. No signs, no belongings, no voices calling back from the trees. The story of Ethan and Caleb had settled into the uneasy category of unsolved, carried forward only by the pain of their parents, the myths of locals, and the arguments of strangers online. But silence does not last forever. It happened on a late October afternoon. A hunter walking along the edge of Whispering Pines spotted movement. At first, he thought it was an animal, a deer stumbling through the brush. But when the figure stepped into the clearing, the hunter froze. It was a man. His clothes were torn, hanging from him in ragged pieces. His face was pale, framed by hair that had grown uneven and wild. His skin clung tightly to his bones, as though he had gone days, even weeks, without proper food. His eyes were wide, glassy, yet unmistakably human. He collapsed against a tree, barely able to stand. The hunter rushed forward, offering water, trying to speak. But the man whispered first, his voice cracked with weakness. Yet the words were clear enough to freeze the hunter where he stood. "My name is Caleb." Authorities were called immediately, within hours. The man was sitting in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses who could scarcely believe what they were hearing. Caleb, 16 when he disappeared, had returned. At first, skepticism ran high. People vanish in forests every year, and imposters, hoaxers, and opportunists sometimes emerge to claim the spotlight. But the evidence mounted quickly. DNA testing was performed. The results came back with no doubt. He was Caleb. His genetic markers matched his parents. This was their son. And yet, when his parents entered the hospital room, they could not help but stagger in disbelief, because the Caleb who sat before them did not look 28. The age he should have been after 12 years. He looked younger, much younger. Yes, he had aged, but not fully. His face had the lines of someone in their early 20s, not their late 20s. His hair, though longer and unkempt, was not streaked with gray. His voice was slightly deeper, but still carried the tone of a young man. Doctors were baffled. Malnutrition could explain some of the features, but not the way his body seemed to have been slowed in time. As though the years had not touched him equally, the mother wept openly, clutching him as if she would never let go again. The father's hands trembled as he held his son's shoulders, whispering his name over and over, as though to reassure himself it was real. But what shook them most were his first coherent words to his family. When asked where he had been, Caleb looked at them with hollow eyes and said simply, "Ethan told me to come back now." The room fell silent. Reporters swarmed the story within days. "Boy missing 12 years returns alive," headlines screamed. News crews camped outside the family home, demanding interviews. The cabin was revisited, filmed from every angle. The forest was filled again with questions. For some, it was a miracle. Parents who had followed the story for years saw hope where none had existed. Forums lit up with wild theories, some celebrating the return as proof that the boys had survived, others insisting it was evidence of something unexplainable at work in the forest. But not everyone believed. Skeptics called it a hoax. How could a boy vanish for 12 years, only to stumble out of the trees looking years younger than he should? Some said he was a runaway who had hidden away, returning only when he was ready. Others insisted he was an imposter who happened to share the family's DNA, an unlikely but not impossible twist, according to conspiracy theorists online. But the family knew. The way he looked at them, the memories he carried, the scar on his wrist from when he'd cut himself on a broken jar as a child. It was Caleb. Still, there was one detail that unsettled even his parents. Whenever anyone pressed him for details about where he had been, Caleb grew quiet. He stared at his hands, his face tightening with something like fear. When pushed further, he repeated the same words he had spoken in the forest. "Ethan told me to come back now." It was as if those words carried a weight he could not explain. Doctors noted signs of malnutrition and exhaustion, but his vital signs were surprisingly strong. His memory was inconsistent, fragments clear, others foggy. He seemed confused about time. He could recall details from the weeks after the disappearance. Nights in the forest, Ethan building fires. But when asked about years, he faltered. Sometimes he claimed only a few months had passed. Other times he admitted he couldn't tell how long it had been. Psychologists speculated trauma, but others whispered something stranger, that perhaps Caleb had been somewhere time moved differently, somewhere outside ordinary life. As the days passed, the town became divided. Some welcomed Caleb home as living proof of resilience, a miracle against all odds. Others eyed him with suspicion, unwilling to accept a story that made no sense. Rumors spread quickly that he wasn't Caleb at all, that he was hiding a crime, that he was the product of something unnatural the forest had birthed. The family shielded him as best they could, but even they could not ignore the unease. Why had Ethan not returned too? Why did Caleb speak of his brother only in fragments, always returning to the same haunting line? "Ethan told me to come back now." If those words were true, then Ethan was still out there, somewhere in the endless expanse of the forest. And if he was, why had he not come back with his brother? The mystery of Ethan and Caleb had begun with silence. Caleb's return had broken that silence. But what he carried back was not comfort. It was dread, because his story of where he had been was stranger than anyone could imagine. At first, Caleb's voice was hesitant, broken by long pauses. He had been gone for 12 years, and yet when asked what had happened, he spoke as though it had been only months. The words came slowly, like fragments slipping through cracks in memory. But what he described chilled everyone who listened. He began with the moment it all changed. The brothers had been hiking along the ridge, planning to make camp before nightfall, when they heard voices, not just echoes, not just the wind, voices calling their names. Caleb swore he heard his own name whispered from the trees, low and urgent, like someone was trying to guide him. Ethan heard it too. At first, they thought it might be another group of hikers, but when they called back, no one answered. The voices only repeated their names, sometimes close, sometimes far away, against his better judgment. Ethan followed the sound. Caleb trailed behind, frightened but unwilling to let his brother out of sight. The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest became. Paths twisted, branches arched unnaturally, and the air felt heavy, as though the trees themselves were pressing inward. After an hour, they stumbled upon something that stopped them cold, an abandoned campsite. Tattered canvas clung to a tree like a shed skin. Rusted cookware lay half buried in dirt. The fire pit was long dead. The ashes cold, but what unnerved them most were the carvings on the trees surrounding the site. Symbols, shapes they didn't recognize, gouged deep into the bark. Circles within circles, jagged lines intersecting. Spirals that seemed to twist when you looked too long. Ethan examined them carefully, his protective instinct kicking in. Caleb remembered the way his brother's jaw tightened, the way his eyes hardened. "We shouldn't be here," Ethan whispered. But leaving wasn't so simple. The voices had grown louder, echoing through the trees, overlapping until they couldn't tell which direction they came from. They made camp anyway, thinking morning light would make the forest feel less threatening. But that first night was unlike any Caleb had ever known. The stars never appeared. The sky was black, absolute, as though the world above had been swallowed. Around their fire, the air shifted strangely, carrying whispers that circled the camp. Sometimes Caleb thought he heard laughter. Other times it was crying. Days blurred. Caleb couldn't recall how long they stayed, because time itself seemed slippery. Hours stretched, then collapsed. He remembered feeling hungry but not knowing when they had last eaten. Ethan remained calm, guiding him, insisting they keep track of routine, fire, food, rest. But even Ethan seemed unsettled. He would wake in the middle of the night, staring into the darkness as though watching something move just beyond their vision. And then Ethan led him deeper. According to Caleb, his brother claimed he had found a place, a hidden hollow where the voices grew quiet. Reluctantly, Caleb followed. The path took them through dense thickets, over streams that shimmered with strange reflections. At last, they reached a clearing unlike anything Caleb had seen. The air felt still, charged, as if it carried weight. Ethan turned to him and whispered, "Here, time doesn't move the same." Caleb didn't understand, but when he tried to measure the days afterward, he realized Ethan was right. Sometimes he woke feeling only minutes had passed, though their fire had burned to ash. Other times entire stretches vanished, as though whole days had slipped away in silence. When Caleb described this to investigators, skepticism hung heavy. Trauma could fracture memory. Starvation and exhaustion could warp time. But what made his account harder to dismiss were the discoveries that followed. Survey teams returned to the forest, searching near the coordinates Caleb gave, and they found them. Carvings, just as Caleb described. Strange symbols cut deep into tree trunks. But alongside them were dates, years etched in crude handwriting, some decades old, others impossibly recent. Dates carved from times when no campers were reported in the area. Some carvings bore initials no one could trace. Even more disturbing were the fire pits. Teams found rings of stone in remote areas untouched by hikers for years. Some were filled with fresh ash, though no one had camped there recently. It was as though fires had been burning in a place no one visited. The evidence gave Caleb's story weight, but it also deepened the mystery. If others had been there before, who were they? What had they been doing? And what had the brothers walked into that night? When pressed about Ethan, Caleb's face darkened. He avoided the question at first, but eventually, the truth broke from him. He said Ethan had chosen to stay behind. According to Caleb, his brother believed the forest had rules, that it had allowed one of them to leave, but not both. "The forest won't let us both go," Ethan had told him. "One of us has to remain." Tears welled in Caleb's eyes as he repeated Ethan's final words to him. "Go home. Caleb, tell them I stayed." Investigators asked if Ethan was alive when Caleb left. Caleb nodded, insisting his brother had guided him to the edge, whispering directions, making him promise to return. Caleb was adamant. Ethan had not died. He had stayed, by choice or by something beyond choice. Caleb couldn't say. The implications shook everyone who listened. If true, it meant Ethan was still in the forest, trapped in the place Caleb described, where time slipped and voices lingered. But if false, it meant Caleb's mind, fractured by years of trauma, was hiding something too painful to face. The family clung to hope. The parents wanted to believe Ethan had survived, even in some altered place. But psychologists suggested Caleb's story was a coping mechanism, a way of explaining why his brother never returned. Skeptics online accused him of lying, of creating myth to cover darker truths. Yet the physical evidence remained: carvings with impossible dates, fire pits with recent ash, signs that someone, or something, had been in those woods long after the brothers vanished. And still, Caleb repeated the same haunting words whenever pressed for clarity. He said the forest wouldn't let us both leave. The investigators were left with two choices: accept Caleb's testimony as truth, however impossible it seemed, or confront the possibility that his mind had been under unbearable strain. Had Caleb been trapped by something supernatural? Or was his fractured memory hiding a darker truth? The return of Caleb should have been the end of the story. After 12 years of silence, he had come home, alive, his identity confirmed, his words recorded, but instead of closure, his reappearance only deepened the mystery. The community, once united in grief, fractured into two camps: those who believed his tale and those who refused to. For some, Caleb's story was the result of trauma. Psychologists argued that starvation, fear, and years of isolation had broken his mind. They pointed to the fragmented memories, the talk of voices and vanished stars, the claim that time moved differently. Hallucinations, they called them. To these skeptics, Caleb had wandered lost for years, surviving on whatever he could find, creating myths to explain the unexplainable. His talk of Ethan staying behind was, they said, a coping mechanism, an invented reason for why only he returned. But others believed. They listened to the details of his account: the symbols carved into bark, the fire pits discovered in untouched corners of the forest, the carvings marked with impossible dates. They looked at Caleb's face, at the strange way time seemed to have touched him lightly, leaving him younger than his years. And they whispered that perhaps his story was true, that the forest itself was not just wilderness, but something more. The divide lingered. Families who had once brought casseroles and prayers to the grieving parents now argued in hushed tones about what really happened. Was Caleb a victim of his own fractured memory, or had he glimpsed something unexplainable? The line between science and myth blurred, and in that blur, the story of the brothers took root as legend. The forest, too, was changed. Locals no longer called it Whispering Pines. To them, it was the Brothers' Hollow. The name carried both reverence and fear. It appeared in local maps, in warnings given to travelers, in late-night conversations where parents cautioned their children. Stay away from the hollow, they said. It keeps what it takes. Those who dared to enter spoke of strange sensations. Compasses spun without reason. Radios cut out with static. Fires sputtered and died as if smothered by unseen hands. Hikers reported hearing their names whispered in the wind, just as Caleb once described. Some claimed to see shapes between the trees, figures on ridges that vanished when approached. Others admitted they felt watched every step of the way, as though the forest itself was following them. Stories spread quickly. One man swore he saw initials carved freshly into a tree, though when he led others back, the markings were gone. A woman claimed to have photographed flickering lights in the forest at night, lantern-like glows that hovered and shifted, though her images came back blurred beyond recognition. Each tale fed into the legend, until the Brothers' Hollow was spoken of in the same breath as other cursed places. Ground where the natural order bent, and where people were wise not to linger. For the family, life never returned to normal. Caleb struggled with the weight of expectation. People wanted answers he could not provide. Each retelling of his story left him drained, his eyes distant, as though reliving it took something from him. His parents, though grateful for his return, carried the grief of Ethan's absence like a second shadow. The cabin remained locked, dust gathered on its windows. Ivy crept along its walls, but each year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, the parents returned to the trailhead. They placed flowers at the signpost, sometimes photographs, sometimes letters folded and left in the hollow of a tree. It was their way of acknowledging both sons, one who came back and one who never did. The legend grew larger than the family, larger than the town. Travelers came not just to hike, but to stand at the edge of the brothers' hollow, to whisper their names into the wind, and see if the forest would whisper back. Some left quickly, unsettled. Others lingered, drawn to the uncanny silence. And then came the final twist. A group of hikers, wandering deeper than most dared, stumbled upon a pine tree. Its bark was scarred with carvings. At first, they thought it was graffiti left by other adventurers. But when they looked closer, the markings chilled them. It was a name, Ethan. Beneath it was a date, not from the past, not from 12 years ago. The date was only weeks earlier. The hikers froze, staring at the letters gouged deep into the wood, the numbers etched with steady hands. It was impossible, and yet there it was. Ethan's name carved into living bark long after he should have vanished. When the discovery was reported, debate erupted once more. Some insisted it was a hoax, carved by thrill-seekers hoping to fuel the legend. Others whispered that it was real, proof that Ethan was still out there, alive, his choice to stay behind somehow, binding him to the forest. For the parents, it was agony renewed. Hope and grief clashed in their hearts, leaving them torn between the miracle of possibility and the cruelty of uncertainty. For Caleb, the carving was confirmation of what he had always insisted. Ethan had stayed. The brothers' hollow gave no more answers. The tree stood as silent witness, its bark bearing a name no one could explain. And so the legacy of Ethan and Caleb endures. A story passed in whispers, a place avoided yet obsessed over, a wound that never healed. The forest remains unchanged, its pines swaying in the wind, its shadows deepening with each sunset. It does not explain, it does not confess, because some places do not just take people, they keep them, and sometimes they send one back with a story no one can believe.